You ever think you've got peace and quiet figured out, only to realize someone's got you in their crosshairs for absolutely no reason? That was me. After years of city chaos, blaring sirens, endless traffic, and neighbors stacked on top of each other like sardines in a can, I finally did it. I escaped. I bought a ranch. Not just any ranch, a slice of paradise tucked far enough from the grid to where the only sounds I hear are the wind through the trees and the occasional moo from my cattle. You'd think out here the headaches of suburban politics would be gone. No HOA breathing down my neck. No clipboard-wielding neighbor with a superiority complex. No Karen. Right? Well, that's what I thought. But oh boy, I was wrong. See, paradise always comes with a catch. And my catch was an HOA that wasn't just power-hungry, it was run by a woman who treated the title of HOA president like she was the sheriff, the mayor, and the FBI all rolled into one. And the problem? I never asked to be part of this HOA in the first place. Now, you gotta understand something about Karen. This isn't your average nosy neighbor. No, this woman weaponizes the phrase community standards like it's the 10 Commandments written just for her. She's the type who wakes up every morning not thinking about her own life but scanning the neighborhood for anything, and I mean anything, that doesn't fit into her plastic little box of perfection. Garden hose slightly unrolled? Fine. Mailbox chipped on the corner? Warning letter. Truck parked in the driveway overnight? Oh, that's a full-blown emergency to her. And don't even get me started if your grass is half an inch taller than her personal measuring stick allows. But her obsession with my ranch went deeper than that. It wasn't about grass or paint color. No, it was something else. Something brewing beneath the surface. Something ugly. The thing is, I keep to myself. Always have. I mind my business. I wave when folks wave. I help when folks need it. But I don't do gossip. I don't do drama. And I sure as heck don't do petty power plays. But to Karen? That right there, me minding my own business. Oh, that was a problem. You see, Karen thrives on control. And nothing drives a control freak crazier than someone who doesn't acknowledge their authority. From day one, when I rolled through with my moving truck and my cattle trailer, she was watching. Hands on hips, sunglasses halfway down her nose, scanning me like TSA at an airport. And when she saw that big steel safe being unloaded into my barn, well, that was the moment. You could see the gears start turning in her head. Her eyes narrowed. Her lips pursed so tight you'd think she just sucked on a lemon. In that instant, I knew. I was officially on Karen's radar. Now let me tell you about this safe. This ain't your average floor safe from the hardware store. No, sir. This thing is a beast. Military grade. Fireproof. Waterproof. Bulletproof. If a tornado ripped through here tomorrow, the only two things left standing would be my barn and that safe. And before anyone gets the wrong idea, no, it's not filled with gold bars or stacks of cash. I'm not some cartel boss hiding treasure. The safe holds important documents, valuable equipment, and let's just say, certain items tied to my previous work with federal agencies. Items that require secure storage. Completely legal. Completely authorized. But to the untrained eye? To someone with an overactive imagination and a hunger for drama? Oh, it probably looks like something out of a spy movie. And wouldn't you know it? Karen's imagination was about to run wilder than a bull let loose at a rodeo. At first, it started with passive-aggressive comments. You know the type. Oh, I couldn't help but notice, you have a rather large structure over there. Planning to open a pawn shop? She'd say with that fake little chuckle, eyes scanning me like she was waiting for a confession. Or, some of the other neighbors are concerned. We've never had safes like that around here. Other neighbors, huh? Funny how those other neighbors were never brave enough to say it themselves. But I brushed it off. I wasn't about to get pulled into her little HOA drama circle. My land is legally zoned. My structures are permitted. And as far as I was concerned, as long as my cattle were happy and my fences were straight, what I kept locked up in my barn was nobody's business. But Karen? Oh, she wasn't one to take being ignored lightly. Ignoring her was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. And that's when the obsession truly began. She started showing up more often. Walking her yappy little dog conveniently past my property 3-4 times a day. Slowing down every time she passed the gate. Peeking through the fence like a kid outside a candy store. I'd catch her snapping photos on her phone. Pretending to check something on a clipboard as if she were logging some grand offense against the community. And then came the rumors. Oh yeah, neighbors started whispering. Did you hear? He's got some kind of vault back there. I heard it's filled with illegal stuff. Some say it's weapons, others say it's drugs. You know how it goes. The rumor mill spins faster than a tornado when someone's feeding it lies. And guess who was holding the crank? But the part Karen didn't realize was that when you poke around in places you don't belong, sometimes you dig yourself into a hole you can't crawl out of. Karen wasn't satisfied with just gossip. Oh no. Gossip was just the appetizer. What she wanted was proof. Something tangible she could hold over me. Something she could wave in front of the HOA board and say, "See? I told you. He's a threat to the community." And that's when her plan went from annoying to downright illegal. It started one morning right before dawn. I was out checking the livestock, making sure the fence line was intact after a windstorm the night before. I noticed something off. The side gate, the one leading toward the back barn where the safe was stored, was unlatched. Now I'm a man who checks his gates. Every time. Like clockwork. That gate doesn't come unlatched by accident. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. Quietly, I rounded the corner of the barn, and that's when I saw her. Karen. Flashlight in one hand. A crowbar in the other. Standing there in broad daylight, trying to jimmy open the door to my barn like she was some bargain bin cat burglar. Her face when she saw me? Priceless. Eyes wide. Jaw dropped. But instead of backing off or apologizing like any reasonable person might, Karen doubled down. "I have every right to inspect this," she shrieked. "This is for the safety of the neighborhood. Lady, you broke into my property. You're trespassing. You've got a crowbar in your hand." But nope. Logic doesn't work on people like her. And here's the kicker. When her crowbar trick didn't work on the barn door, she pivoted. Straight up walked around back, found a side window and started trying to pry that open. And you want to know the real kicker? Right there on the side of the safe, bold, unmistakable, was the embossed seal of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation. Yeah, you heard me. FBI. Because the safe didn't just look like something out of a spy movie, it was. Only Karen was about to learn that the hard way. The thing about people like Karen is that when their little schemes start unraveling, instead of backing down, they double down. See, when she realized she couldn't physically break into my barn or that safe, panic started clawing its way up her throat, but her pride was still louder than her common sense. And that's when it happened. Her brain flipped into overdrive, cooking up a delusion so wild it would have made a conspiracy theorist blush. She yanked out her phone like it was some kind of badge of authority and started pacing back and forth, muttering to herself, then stopped dead in her tracks. Thumb hovered over the dial pad and punched in 3 numbers. 911, and I just stood there watching this train wreck unfold in real time. Her voice was shrill, shaking, but not from fear. No. This was the tone of someone desperately trying to hold onto the fantasy that they were the hero in a situation they absolutely had no business being in. "Yes, I'm reporting suspicious activity at the ranch on West Creek Road," she spat into the receiver. "I believe there's dangerous contraband. Possibly explosives, maybe weapons? I'm not sure. But I have reason to believe the man who owns this property is doing something illegal. Something very illegal." And in that moment, I realized exactly the kind of person I was dealing with. Someone who wasn't just nosy. Not just a busybody. No, Karen was the kind of person who could look you dead in the eye while trespassing on your land, while holding a literal crowbar, and somehow convince herself, and anyone who would listen, that you were the criminal. It wasn't long before the distant whine of sirens started creeping over the hills, growing louder with every passing second, and the air shifted. You could feel it. Thick. Heavy. Like the sky itself was holding its breath. And I knew exactly how this was about to play out. Because people like Karen? They know exactly what they're doing. They don't call 911 because they actually think a crime is happening. They call to escalate. To intimidate. To weaponize the very systems designed to protect people. And the worst part? They do it with the fake innocence of someone who'll cry on cue the moment consequences come knocking. So there she was, standing right there on my property, arms folded, chin up, pacing like she was the one in charge of the scene. And as those flashing lights turned the corner, dust kicking up behind the squad car, you could see it in her eyes, this sick, smug satisfaction. She really thought this was it. That she was about to watch me get hauled away in handcuffs. That all her little HOA fantasies were finally about to pay off. What she didn't realize is that reality was about to slap her across the face harder than life ever had before. When the officers stepped out of the car, you could immediately sense the confusion. Here they were, responding to a call about alleged explosives, contraband, and God knows what else. Only to arrive at a perfectly quiet ranch, livestock grazing in the distance, a well-kept barn, and a middle-aged woman standing with a crowbar looking like she'd just been caught trying to rob Fort Knox. And then there was me, standing with my arms crossed, leaning casually against the fence like I was waiting for a pizza delivery. You could almost hear the record scratch in their heads. One of the officers approached cautiously, hand resting near his belt but not drawn, while the other stayed back, radio in hand. Karen practically launched herself at them. "Officers. Thank goodness you're here," she blurted, all but shoving her phone into their faces. "This man, he's storing dangerous items. I tried to inspect his property for the safety of our community, and when I found this," she whipped around and pointed straight at the barn, "this safe. Who knows what's inside? Drugs? Guns? Bombs? And if you've ever seen someone trying desperately to make a mountain out of a molehill, this was it." Her voice hit this high-pitched tone that wasn't quite a scream but wasn't really words either. Like her vocal cords were just as confused as the rest of us. The officers glanced at each other. You could tell this wasn't their first rodeo with someone like her. But before either of them could speak, one of them caught sight of something. His eyes narrowed. His head tilted. And then, it clicked. Right there, bolted to the side of the safe, clear as day, was that embossed federal seal. Not just any seal. The unmistakable badge of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation. You could see his entire posture change. The casual uncertainty melted right off his face, replaced with something sharper. Something more serious. He walked straight past Karen, ignoring her as if she was nothing more than background noise, and approached the barn with a level of caution that told me he understood exactly what he was looking at. He radioed something, short, clipped, direct, and then turned back to me, his tone professional but edged with curiosity. "Sir, can I ask, is this what I think it is?" I nodded. "Come." Unbothered. "Yup," I said, hands still resting on the fence. "It's exactly what you think it is." And in that instant the entire dynamic shifted. Karen, who just seconds ago was puffed up like a rooster in a henhouse, suddenly looked like she swallowed her own tongue. See, what Karen didn't realize was that my connection to the safe wasn't just some random fluke. Years back, I'd done some highly specialized contract work with federal agencies. Work that required discretion, security, and more importantly, storage of certain classified materials under very strict guidelines. The safe itself was government-issued, part of an ongoing contract to temporarily house and protect sensitive equipment until it could be transported to a secure federal facility. Entirely legal. Entirely documented. And every single inch of that safe, from the bolts to the biometric locks, was logged with the Bureau. Which meant, tampering with it wasn't just trespassing. It wasn't just burglary. It wasn't even just a felony. No, tampering with that safe was interfering with federal property. A crime that makes your average break-in look like jaywalking. And Karen? Sweet, delusional, crowbar-wielding Karen had just kicked the hornet's nest of all hornet's nests. It didn't take long. Within minutes of the officer's radio call, the gravel road leading to my ranch was lit up with more flashing lights than a Christmas parade. Unmarked SUVs. Blacked-out vans. Agents in plain clothes but with that unmistakable air of authority that lets you know, these weren't regular cops. These were feds. Real ones. The kind of people who don't show up unless something very serious is going down. And as they rolled up, stepping out with folders, gear bags and radios buzzing, Karen's face went from pale, to green, to ghost white. She started stammering, stepping backwards, hands fluttering like she was trying to swat away the reality that was descending on her like a hammer. This is a misunderstanding," she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper now. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." But the agents didn't even glance at her. Their eyes were on the safe. On me. On the situation. Because from their perspective, there was now an entirely different crime scene unfolding, and the suspect wasn't me. And here's the thing. When federal property gets tampered with, even by some nosy suburban queen with a superiority complex, the response isn't measured. It isn't calm. It's decisive. Immediate. One of the agents walked right over to the first responding officer, reviewed the body cam footage, took one look at Karen's crowbar still lying on the dirt, and immediately began coordinating a response. Another agent approached me, formal but respectful. "We've reviewed the surveillance footage you provided. Thank you for your cooperation," he said, nodding toward the monitor I'd brought up from my security feed. "Because oh yeah, every inch of that barn? Wired. Front gate? Cameras. Perimeter fence? Sensors. And every single second of Karen's little breaking and entering adventure was caught in crisp, glorious HD. And as the agent flipped through the footage frame by frame, you could see the growing look of absolute disbelief melt into cold, procedural focus. "Sir," he said, snapping his notebook shut, "based on what we're seeing, it looks like your HOA president here has committed multiple federal offenses. trespassing on private property, attempted burglary, and tampering with federal assets. He turned slowly, staring directly at Karen. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." You would think that someone caught red-handed, standing on someone else's property with a crowbar in one hand and a phone in the other after calling 911 to report a crime that they themselves were in the process of committing, might finally stop and reflect for half a second. You'd think maybe, just maybe, the realization that they were now face-to-face with federal agents would kick some sense into them. But no, Karen wasn't built like that. No, when panic hit her, it didn't bring humility, it brought hysteria. The instant those words came out of that agent's mouth, "Ma'am, you're under arrest," her entire demeanor snapped like a dry twig. Her eyes grew wide, her hands flailed, and suddenly her voice shot from self-righteous rage into a screeching, desperate wail that could probably be heard from 3 counties over. "You don't understand," she screamed, practically hyperventilating. "I was doing my civic duty. I was protecting the community." Her face was blotchy now, splotches of red and pale patches swapping places like her skin couldn't decide whether it wanted to be embarrassed or terrified. This man is hiding something dangerous. He has a safe. Look at it. Why would someone need a safe that big unless they were doing something illegal? And that, right there, was her entire defense strategy, pure, uncut paranoia, wrapped in the self-importance of someone who truly believed that the world revolved around her and her HOA clipboard. But the agents? Oh, they weren't playing her game. Not even a little bit. One of them, a tall guy with sunglasses so dark you couldn't see a hint of his eyes, simply turned his head slightly and said, deadpan, "Ma'am, you just confessed, on a live police body cam, in front of 2 local officers, and 3 federal agents, to trespassing, attempted burglary and interfering with federal property. I suggest you stop talking now." But Karen, bless her delusional little heart, was way past the point of listening to reason. "This is a mistake," she shrieked. "You're making a mistake. I'm the president of the HOA. I have the authority to inspect any property in this community. It's in the bylaws." And that right there, oh, you could see it on the agents' faces, was the moment they realized exactly how far gone this woman was. Because to her, those 3 little letters, HOA, apparently meant she outranked the federal government. I watched, leaning against my fence post, arms crossed, biting back a grin, because as insane as this was, part of me wanted to see how far she'd take it. And take it she did. "I demand to speak to your supervisor," she snapped, pointing at the agent like she was ordering a latte. "You can't arrest me. I am an elected official in this community. And brother, let me tell you, I have never seen an FBI agent chuckle before, but the smallest smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he deadpanned, "Ma'am, my supervisor is the United States Department of Justice." And while Karen was unraveling faster than a bargain bin sweater in a washing machine, the first officer who'd arrived on the scene stepped aside to run the serial number on the safe, double-checking the report that had now officially become a federal matter. And it didn't take long. Because the second that serial number came back, it confirmed exactly what they already knew. That safe was an active piece of federal equipment, tied to an open classified logistics chain. And that meant one thing. Any tampering with it was automatically escalated from your average criminal charge to a direct federal offense. Now here's where it gets really wild, because when the officer walked back over to the agents, Karen caught sight of the computer screen over his shoulder and saw that it displayed the words, "Federal property, classified material, do not tamper." Her face drained of every last drop of color like someone had hit her with a ghost filter in real life. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. But no words came out. Because for the first time in this entire circus of a day, reality finally caught up to her. And when the second agent stepped forward, pulling out the zip ties, she stammered, No, you can't arrest me. I didn't know it was federal property." And the agent just looked her dead in the eye and said, "That's the thing about the law, ma'am. Ignorance doesn't make it less illegal." And that's the golden lesson here, isn't it? Because people like Karen, and trust me, we've all met someone like this, think that their personal opinion somehow overrides facts, laws, and reality. They believe that if they feel like you've broken a rule, that's all the proof they need. It doesn't matter if you're minding your own business. It doesn't matter if you're following every law, every zoning code, every guideline to the letter. If they don't like it, then you must be in the wrong. And so they act. Not based on facts. Not based on actual concern. But based on the twisted little world they've built in their heads where they are the judge, jury, and executioner of their neighborhood. And that's exactly how Karen ended up here, hands behind her back, wrists bound with zip ties, being read her Miranda rights by two federal agents while the officers on scene quietly documented the whole thing with the kind of grim professionalism that told me this wasn't the first time they'd seen someone's life implode in real time. But the best part, the absolute best part, is what happened next. Because just as the agents were preparing to escort her to the car, Karen, true to form, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the tattered scraps of her ego. "You'll regret this," she snapped, her voice trembling but still dripping with that same entitlement. "When the HOA hears about this, they're going to sue all of you. You can't just arrest an HOA president without cause." And the agent didn't even flinch. He didn't even blink. He just slid his sunglasses back up the bridge of his nose and said, "Ma'am, you didn't just break HOA rules. You broke federal law. And the HOA doesn't outrank the FBI." And right then and there, Karen's legs buckled. She collapsed onto the dirt, knees hitting the ground, letting out this high-pitched whimper that didn't sound like it came from a human being so much as a deflating balloon. Her little power fantasy, the one where she ruled the neighborhood like some self-appointed queen, evaporated in the blink of an eye. And in its place? Pure, unfiltered reality. The cold steel of those handcuffs. The weight of the charges. And the horrifying realization that her little HOA rulebook meant absolutely nothing when you tried to break into a federal safe. And if there's a real lesson in all of this, beyond the chaos, beyond the absurdity, beyond the sheer hilarity of watching someone's ego crash headfirst into the brick wall of reality, it's this. Mind your own business. Because what Karen failed to understand, and what so many people like her never seem to learn, is that not everything you don't understand is dangerous. Not every locked door hides a threat. Not every person who values their privacy is a criminal. Some people just want to live their lives, raise their animals, enjoy their peace, and be left the heck alone. And when you cross the line, when you let your own paranoia, your own entitlement, your own desperate need for control drive you to trespass, to harass, to fabricate lies, well, sometimes life comes back around and hands you the consequences you never thought you'd have to face. In Karen's case, those consequences came with badges, federal warrants, and a one-way trip off her own self-appointed throne. And as they loaded her into the back of that SUV, kicking and screaming the whole way, all I could do was tip my hat, lean against my fence post and think to myself, maybe, just maybe, there is justice in the world after all. As the dust settled on the ranch, the flashing lights still bouncing off the barn walls, you could almost feel the shift in the air, the way the atmosphere transforms when a simple neighborhood spat turns into something far more serious, far more dangerous, and far more consequential than anyone ever intended. And let me tell you, nothing punctuates that shift like the sudden presence of federal agents quietly discussing how to process a case that went from petty trespassing to a full-scale federal incident in under an hour. The first officer, still trying to wrap his head around how a 911 call about suspicious activity spiraled into a felony-level crime scene, stepped aside to give space to the agents. The FBI wasn't here to chit-chat. They were here to investigate, thoroughly, methodically, and without an ounce of patience for anyone who thought this was just some HOA misunderstanding. I watched as one of the lead agents pulled a tablet from his bag, tapping through a secured database, and cross-referencing the serial numbers etched into the side of that safe. His expression shifted from stern to stone-cold serious the second the information popped up on his screen. He turned his head slightly, glancing back toward Karen, who by now had gone from outraged suburban queen to a trembling, incoherent mess of excuses and half-finished sentences. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't just local police anymore. This wasn't some HOA dispute that would end with a slap on the wrist and a warning letter. No, this was federal. This was real. And this was about to cost her everything. You could tell exactly when the weight of it landed on her chest because her posture changed completely. Gone was the squared-back, arms-crossed stance of someone pretending to hold power over everyone around her. In its place was someone who suddenly realized, with horrifying clarity, that the world didn't actually revolve around her clipboard, her bylaws, or her HOA position. The lead agent approached her again, calm but firm, holding out a sheet of paper, a preliminary charge notice outlining exactly what laws she'd broken. "Ma'am," he began in that slow, deliberate tone that lets you know this isn't a conversation. This is a statement of fact. You are being charged with criminal trespass, attempted burglary, and tampering with federal property. These are serious offenses under federal law. Karen blinked, mouth hanging open, struggling to process the words as if the syllables themselves were physically too heavy for her brain to hold. "I didn't know. I didn't know it was federal," she stammered again, her voice cracking into something fragile, something small. And the agent didn't even flinch. He just folded the paper and tucked it into the evidence bag like he'd done this 100 times before, Because ignorance, as anyone who's ever worked in law enforcement will tell you, isn't a defense. It's an admission that you thought you could act first and think later. The real kicker though, the absolute chef's kiss of poetic justice, came when the agents pulled out the security footage. The same footage I'd handed over willingly, showing every second of Karen's little adventure from the moment she stepped foot onto my property to the exact frame where she pulled out a crowbar and started wrenching at the barn door like she was auditioning for a role in some low-budget crime show. And let me tell you, watching her watch herself on that screen was a moment of pure cinematic gold. Her face twisted in real-time horror as every lie she told the 911 dispatcher, every accusation she'd thrown at me, was instantly obliterated by cold, hard, indisputable evidence. The footage showed it all. Her creeping around the fence line, her forcing the gate open, her marching up to the barn and circling it like a shark before choosing her entry point. It even caught her muttering under her breath, "I'll find out what's in there if it's the last thing I do." Well, the irony. Because as it turns out, yeah, it just might be the last thing she does as a free citizen for a very, very long time. And while the agents were cataloging every piece of evidence, taking photos, securing the scene, and running checklists with mechanical precision, Karen was still trying to grasp at straws, desperate straws, flailing straws. "I didn't mean to. I was just doing what the HOA empowers me to do. We have the right to enforce community safety," she babbled, her voice so shrill and broken that even the crows sitting on the fence post flew off like, "Yeah, nah, we don't need this kind of noise in our lives today." But here's the harsh truth, and it's a truth more people need to hear. HOA rules do not, have never, and will never supersede federal law. You cannot trespass onto private property under the guise of community standards. You cannot force your way into someone's home, barn, garage, or safe simply because you don't like the fact that it's there. There is no clause, no bylaw, no neighborhood ordinance on the face of this planet that grants anyone the right to commit crimes in the name of maintaining property values. But the sad thing is, folks like Karen don't understand that. They live in this bubble, this delusion that the small shred of power given to them by an HOA title makes them untouchable, and oh how wrong they are when that bubble finally pops. As the agents loaded the last of the evidence into their SUV and prepared to transport Karen to the federal holding facility, not just the county jail but a federal facility, the look on her face said it all. It was the look of someone who had just realized, too late, that the consequences of their actions were so far beyond what they imagined that there was no walking it back. No lawyer letter was going to undo this. No HOA meeting was going to vote this away. No angry neighborhood Facebook post was going to rally the troops on her side. This was bigger than gossip, bigger than petty power struggles, bigger than the fake authority she'd built her entire identity around. And you could see that dawning horror settle over her like a suffocating fog, the realization that when you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, and sometimes those prizes come with a federal case number stamped right on top. Watching her get into that SUV, hands bound, head hung low, I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. What I felt was closure. The sweet, satisfying closure that comes when the universe, or in this case the justice system, reminds people exactly where the line is drawn. And as the caravan of law enforcement vehicles finally pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that drifted lazily down the gravel road, I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the silence that returned like an old friend. The cattle were back to grazing. The birds had come back to the fence posts. The wind rustled through the trees like nothing had ever happened. But something had happened. Something big. And not just for me. Because I guarantee you that every neighbor who peeked out from behind their curtains, every resident who'd lived under the oppressive thumb of Karen's HOA dictatorship, now had a front row seat to one of the greatest lessons life can teach, that the abuse of power, no matter how small or petty, always comes with a price. What's wild about human nature is how quickly people scramble to distance themselves from a sinking ship the moment it starts taking on water. The very same HOA board that once propped Karen up like she was the queen of the neighborhood, the self-declared champion of community standards, the mighty enforcer of petty rules and ridiculous fines, oh, they went silent faster than a pin dropping in an empty room. It was almost comical how quickly her so-called allies became strangers. Word travels fast in communities like this, faster than wildfire on dry grass. The HOA board members who once smiled at her, nodded approvingly as she marched around handing out violation notices, suddenly couldn't be reached for comment. Emails? Unanswered. Text? Left on read. Phone calls? Straight to voicemail. It was as if the very ground she once stood on had opened up beneath her feet, swallowing every ounce of the false authority she'd clung to. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about these HOA power-hungry types. Their authority only exists as long as nobody questions it. And the moment someone points out that the emperor has no clothes, that their power is purely imaginary outside the narrow boundaries of neighborhood bylaws, they crumble like a stale cracker in a rainstorm. You could practically smell the panic radiating from the HOA office the day after Karen's arrest. Members were scrambling, trying to craft statements that carefully threaded the needle between "we had no idea" and "we obviously don't condone this," while still desperately clinging to whatever shred of control they thought they had left. Their official statement, which landed in everyone's inbox around 8 a.m., was an absolute masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. The HOA board would like to express our deep concern over the recent events involving our former president, Mrs. Karen, redacted. While we strive to maintain high community standards, the actions taken by Mrs. Redacted were unauthorized, independent, and do not reflect the values of this community or its governing body. Oh, now it's unauthorized, huh? Now it's independent? Funny how none of that mattered when she was terrorizing homeowners over minor fence height discrepancies or the color of their mailboxes. But now, with the FBI involved and the whole neighborhood watching, suddenly they wanted the world to believe that Karen was acting alone, a rogue operative gone off the rails. And let me tell you, nobody was buying it. Not for a second. You could see the ripple effect spreading across the neighborhood like shockwaves after a bomb drops. The residents, folks who had quietly tolerated Karen's reign of HOA terror for years, suddenly found their voices. Where once there were whispers behind closed doors, now there were conversations happening out in the open. Neighbors who barely spoke beyond the occasional nod at the mailbox were now gathering on driveways, leaning on fences, comparing stories of every ridiculous, petty fine and harassment letter they'd received over the years. And the stories? Oh, they poured out like floodwaters. She fined me for having my holiday lights up 3 days too long. She tried to write me up for planting the wrong type of flowers in my front yard. She told me my kid's bike being left on the front porch was a violation of community decorum. It was like a group therapy session where everyone suddenly realized they weren't crazy, they'd just been gaslit by someone wielding a rulebook like a weapon. And now, with Karen behind bars and the HOA scrambling to cover its tracks, the entire neighborhood was waking up to a new reality. Maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to live like this anymore. The media caught wind of it next. Oh yeah, you better believe the local news stations were all over this like flies on honey. Helicopters buzzing overhead, reporters parked on the sidewalk with camera crews, eager to capture every juicy detail of the scandal now dubbed the HOA heist. Headlines practically wrote themselves. HOA president arrested after attempted break-in of federal property. Neighborhood watch or neighborhood menace. HOA president faces felony charges. The news segments were priceless. Footage of Karen being loaded into a federal SUV played on loop while the anchor recited the details with just the right amount of dramatic pause. You could almost hear the anchor smirking between sentences. And then came the real kicker, the interviews. Neighbors lined up to spill their stories. Faces blurred, voices disguised for the extra spice of mystery, they shared tale after tale of Karen's tyranny. One elderly couple recounted how she tried to fine them for having a garden gnome that wasn't in line with the neighborhood aesthetic. Another guy laughed as he told the reporter how Karen measured his grass with a literal ruler and threatened him with daily fines. And as the camera panned to the serene, perfectly ordinary suburban street, the irony was thicker than molasses. This was the woman who claimed to be keeping the neighborhood safe. But as the community united in shared disbelief and, let's be honest, more than a little satisfaction, the legal wheels were already turning behind the scenes. Karen wasn't just looking at a slap on the wrist. Oh no, the charges stacked against her like a bad hand in poker. Trespassing? Federal charge, thanks to the safe being government property. Attempted burglary? Enhanced because the item targeted was a federal asset. Filing a false police report? Add that to the pile. And tampering with federal property? That alone carries penalties stiff enough to flip someone's entire life upside down. Her lawyer, assuming she managed to find one brave enough to take her case, was going to have to perform legal gymnastics just to keep her out of prison for a decade. And here's the lesson, loud and clear for anyone who's ever been bullied by a little tyrant hiding behind a homeowners association badge. The law doesn't care about your imaginary authority. There is a line, and when you cross it, when your need for control overrides common sense, decency, and actual legal boundaries, the consequences come faster than you can dial 911. And here's the part that nobody talks about, the aftermath. Because after the dust settles, after the lights fade and the reporters pack up their cameras, life doesn't just snap back to normal. No, it changes. Permanently. For the HOA, the scandal was an extinction-level event. Emergency board meetings were called. Petitions flew faster than summer mosquitoes. Residents demanded accountability, transparency, and most importantly, change. People who'd never attended an HOA meeting in their lives suddenly showed up, furious, determined, and louder than the handful of control freaks who'd once run the place. Lawsuits were threatened. Some were filed. And as for Karen? Well, her name became legend, not the good kind. The cautionary tale kind. The kind parents whisper to their kids when teaching them the importance of minding their own business. A name forever immortalized not as the queen of the neighborhood, but as the woman who let her obsession with control spiral so far out of hand that it landed her in federal custody. And for the rest of us, standing in the glow of freedom from her tyranny, the lesson was seared into our bones. Document everything. Know your rights. And never, ever, let someone convince you that their fake authority is more powerful than the law itself. You'd think after everything, after the FBI intervention, the handcuffs, the public humiliation, the media circus, that Karen might finally understand the concept of consequences. That she'd sit in that cold interrogation room, stare at the concrete walls, and reflect on how her insatiable hunger for power turned her life into a burning wreck. But no, not Karen. Not a chance. Because here's the thing about people like her, when the walls close in, they don't reflect, they don't apologize. They double down on the delusion. Reports later revealed that while sitting in custody, Karen tried pulling the same move she'd always used in the neighborhood. She demanded to speak to someone higher up. "I want the director," she snapped at an agent like she was ordering fries at a drive-thru. "I have rights. I'm an HOA president." Her voice, frantic and trembling, carried the same tone of fake authority she'd wielded for years, except now it was bouncing off walls that didn't care. There's something almost tragic about watching a person realize in real time that the rules they weaponized against others don't shield them when the tables turn. It's the kind of lesson that hits harder than a courtroom verdict. It's the bitter taste of reality shattering the fantasy of invincibility. But while Karen was busy spiraling in her own private meltdown, the fallout back home was something out of a reality TV season finale, except nobody scripted this. The HOA wasn't just under fire, it was under siege. Residents, armed with years of pent-up frustration and fresh motivation from the scandal, descended on the next emergency HOA meeting like lions on a wounded gazelle. There were no polite nods this time, no quiet grumbling. People stood up and demanded resignations, not requests, demands. Lawsuits were being drafted. The board's financial records were called into question. Every shady fine, every questionable penalty, every petty violation Karen had written over the years was now under a microscope. It wasn't just about fences being an inch too tall or the wrong shade of beige on someone's garage door. This was about abuse of power, about control run wild, about a community waking up and realizing they'd been living under the thumb of someone who treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. And watching that wall of fear finally collapse, replaced by courage and unity, was one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. It was proof that when people come together, when they stop tolerating abuse disguised as rules, real change happens. And let's talk about Karen's family for a moment, because when someone's house of cards collapses, it doesn't fall in silence. Oh no, the tremors shake everything and everyone connected to it. Her family, who had always walked that awkward tightrope of supporting her while quietly apologizing to neighbors behind her back, were now thrown into the eye of the storm. You could see the shame on their faces, not because they'd done anything, but because they'd spent years quietly tolerating the ticking time bomb that was Karen's obsession with control. Her husband, a man who had become infamous for mowing his lawn twice a day to avoid her wrath about presentation standards, was now seen walking the neighborhood, head down, sunglasses on, avoiding eye contact like he was hoping the earth itself would swallow him whole. Her adult kids, who had moved out years ago and likely thought they were free from the HOA madness, were now fielding phone calls from reporters, lawyers, and distant relatives asking, "Is this real? Did she really try to break into a federal safe?" The ripple effect of one person's ego-fueled collapse was now sinking into every corner of her personal life. And if there's a takeaway there, it's this. Unchecked control doesn't just poison a community. It poisons relationships. It poisons families. And when it all crashes down, everyone pays a piece of the price. But perhaps the most satisfying moment, the absolute cherry on top of this entire saga, came when the official court proceedings began. The courtroom was packed. Not just with lawyers, agents, and reporters, but with neighbors. Oh yes, neighbors who had spent years under her thumb showed up like it was opening night at the theater. Some wore suits. Some wore t-shirts with slogans like, "Free the Ranch," and "HOA Tyranny Ends Today." And as the judge read out the charges, trespassing, attempted burglary, filing a false report, tampering with federal property, the murmurs through the gallery were thick with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. Karen sat there, hollow-eyed, no longer the queen of the neighborhood, but just another defendant in an orange jumpsuit, stripped of the illusion that her power ever extended beyond the page of a poorly written HOA handbook. And when the judge denied bail, citing the seriousness of tampering with federal equipment, you could almost feel the collective exhale from the crowd. It was justice not just for me, not just for the FBI, but for every person who had ever been bullied, threatened, or fined by someone hiding behind fake authority. And the legacy? Oh, it lives on. Long after the courtroom doors closed and the news vans rolled out, the impact remained. The HOA as it once was? Gone. Dismantled. Rebuilt from the ground up by residents who swore, never again. New bylaws were written, this time with real protections for homeowners, limits on what the HOA could enforce, and strict checks on power abuse. The story spread far beyond the neighborhood, shared on podcasts, YouTube channels, morning news shows, even national media picked it up. It became a viral lesson in what happens when control meets consequence. People from other states started sharing their own HOA horror stories, realizing they weren't alone. It sparked conversations about rights, about boundaries, about how to stand up when someone crosses the line between maintaining order and enforcing tyranny. And as for Karen? Her name became legend, but not the kind anyone wants. Not the kind etched on a plaque. The kind whispered at barbecues, shared in online forums, and laughed about in group chats. She became the walking, talking cautionary tale that every overreaching HOA president across the country secretly fears becoming. And that, right there, is the final lesson. Never confuse your temporary position of power for untouchable authority. Because the bigger you build your throne out of control and fear, the harder it falls when reality kicks the legs out from under it.